Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Who is the creepiest person you have ever met?
It was a few weeks ago in a shopping mall. There was a lady who looked like she was in her 60s, walking around the department store I was in, with a really morbid look on her face, and her face looked really droopy, either from a stroke or just age. She was walking around and darting her head left and right to stare at people. She turned really suddenly and stared at me, for about a second, but her fucking image is still burnt in my brain. Then as I was leaving the mall, I saw her again walking around, and she was still darting glares at everyone, and stared at me again. I just got a really unsettling feeling from her.
Around 13 or 14 at the time. Walk dogs on the same route around the village. Always walked down a real long lane that stretched between backyards of opposite houses. Garages and sheds ran along one side, brick walls along the other. Halfway through the lane was an old run-down car, with a little black dome thing on the dashboard. Said dome was constantly blinking red, either an alarm or a camera, I imagine. In front of the car was a real dilapidated horse box. Pick not the same one, but very similar. Rusted to all hell, holes and open areas were heavily boarded up with wood and sheet metal. Every time I walked down this lane, dogs would constantly run to the horse box and frantically start sniffing around it and consistently pull back on the leash as I'd try and pull them away. Thought nothing of it, until I noticed other dogs would behave the same way around it. Horse box began to gain my curiosity. Began to take dogs out more often just to see if they'd eventually lose interest in the horse box. They didn't. If anything, they got more persistent, would start dragging me towards it, sometimes growl at it, or me, when I'd try and pull them away. Decided to try and take a look for myself, it wouldn't hurt. Started circling the box as best I could. Looking for some kind of opening, I noticed a relatively loose piece of wood towards the top of the box, being held in place by a couple of rusty nails. Curiosity got the better of me and I tried to get a peek inside by pulling the wood just a little. Decided probably not the best idea after I heard footsteps coming towards the gate beside the box. Yanked the dogs away and hurried to the end of the lane. Could have been nothing, didn't bother looking back. Few days passed and I needed to take another look. Horse box now had my attention. Started going out with the dogs later in the evening, quieter time, less likely to be interrupted, I thought. Sun was setting earlier, this was late summer, so days began getting shorter but had plenty of daylight to start snooping. So I took the dogs on their walk, same route, just at a different time. Started coming up towards the lane, but my plans changed when I saw some old man standing directly in front of the horse box, just staring at it. He had a dog with him and it was the first dog I'd seen which hadn't gone ape shit when next to said horse box. Thought to myself, maybe it was just one big coincidence that every dog I'd seen acted the same way. Continued to watch the fella from afar, pretended to pick up dog shit so I'd look relatively normal if he took a glance at me and saw me hanging around. The old man then began toying with the horse box, touching the wood, adjusting the sheet metal. He stood doing this for a while. Hell, I'm not even sure how long I stood there, picking up dog shit. After a while he just stood and stared at it for several more minutes before opening the gate beside it and walking into his backyard. That makes a whole lot of sense, I thought. Explains why the dog wasn't showing any interest with the thing. More days passed and the summer break was slowly coming to a close. Decided to make it my mission to now find out what was inside the horse box that got the dogs all spooked before school started again. Sun probably set around 7 p.m. and I decided to go and have another look. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out. I left the dogs at home this time. So the time had come, I thought. No pussyfooting around it this time. No dogs. No distractions. Come up to the horse box. Never really affected me in any way like it did with dogs. Whole different story when it's dark, no street lamps around, and the only light illuminating this piece of junk was a dim flashlight. Actually started feeling a little nauseous, still not quite sure whether it was this inanimate object that was causing me to feel this way, or me thinking that maybe I was breaking the law in some way. Decided to nut up and circle the thing, but couldn't find the loose wood I'd moved about a week or so ago. Old man had clearly made some improvements. There were more nails in the wood. More sheet metal had been applied. Something was in this box that he didn't want people to see. His defense had leveled up tenfold. Started thinking to myself that maybe I wasn't best equipped for such a task and maybe I'd need some tools to get the job done. Those thoughts were quickly diminished when I noticed that an area had been untouched by Tim Allen from Home Improvement. I managed to pull myself up to the open part of the box by positioning myself awkwardly on the wheel arch. Probably should have used a headlamp or something in hindsight, because trying to keep myself balanced, upright and try and pull myself up to eye level with the open area was a chore with one free hand, flashlight at the ready in the other. Alas, I stabilized myself in a comfortable position and got my light to shine inside. Not sure if it was because I was elevated, but some very bizarre smell which I still to this day can't put my finger on suddenly hit me. A stench I'd never smelled before now hit me like a train. I guess this was why the dogs went bananas around the thing. I still couldn't make out what was inside, so I tried to lift myself higher. In doing so, I pulled a piece of wood from the box, dropped my flashlight inside and slipped. So the fall clearly made a whole lot of noise, but not enough to disturb the peace, I'd say. But being the ignorant, set in my ways kinda guy that I am, I completely forgot about the little blinking red light in the car beside the box. Pretty sure it was a camera. So I got back up, and went for another look. Lo and behold, the footsteps started coming. And they sounded in a hurry. I started to panic and didn't know what to do or where to go. I kind of just froze. The gate behind me swung open and in an instant I was now face to face with the guy. He was old. Like he looked real old. Leathery skin, a dirty mustache, deep, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't say a word. He grabbed me by both shoulders, and somewhat gently pushed me against the horse box. With my back up against it, I had nowhere to look but straight at him. It didn't even feel as though he was looking at me. I know it sounds cliché, but it did feel like he was looking right through me, like the only thing he could see was the horse box. He stood like this for several seconds before pulling out some kind of disposable camera and taking a snapshot of what must have been a very pale face of mine. He then fixed his focus to actually look at me and said something along the lines of, "Silly boy." Or, "Stupid boy," and he shook his head. Pretty sure he went to say something else as he looked at his disposable camera, but I decided I wasn't in the mood to make small talk and I legged it back down the lane. Back the way I came. Fair to say I didn't want to go back to this lane, and I avoided it religiously for several months. Just after Christmas I decided to take an early morning walk down the lane just to see if Tim Allen had made any more improvements. The horse box was nowhere to be seen, and neither was the car with the camera alarm. I felt as though a weight had been lifted off my chest knowing this old guy had relocated his creepy junk somewhere else. I still didn't like the thought of this guy potentially having a photograph of me lying around somewhere, but the thought of him being out of the area was good enough. I never saw the old guy again, nor did I ever see that horse box again, and walking my dogs was far easier without them being constantly distracted by it. Around the end of January, I was taking a walk with a friend to the park and we took the lane as a shortcut. The entire backyard area of Horsebox House was cornered off with police tape. And several officers were standing around the area. I looked into the yard and there were men in white hazmat suits walking up and down his garden, and several holes had been dug along the patch of grass. I don't know where the old man went, and I still to this day don't know what was going on in his backyard, and I don't think I'll ever find out.
Not me, but my dad had an upstairs neighbor after he moved out of his parents' old house. This guy was banging on the floor with a broomstick almost 24/7. Like, non-stop. When he met him in the hall downstairs, the guy would never show his face and pass my dad in a hurry without saying anything. This went on for weeks, until my dad went up to confront him about it. He knocked and he said he could smell this awful stench coming from behind the door. He went back downstairs and didn't hear any knocking that night. Next day though, the knocking continued and was even louder. At this point he was also fed up with the other neighbors and just the overall living conditions in his apartment, so he moved out. He never heard from the guy again, but I wonder what kind of depraved lunatic was lurking there upstairs.
This is a brief story, but it's the thing that really made me believe that magic or something like it truly exists. It's 2011, I'm about 14 and my brother is 12. Go on trip to family hometown in Ukraine for the summer with grandparents. On a city bus returning to our apartment. Pass money up to passenger in front of us to pass on to the driver, that's how they do it there. Passenger looks back at us when grabbing the money. She is very unusual looking, she was older, but I couldn't exactly tell her age, and she had large eyes. Keeps looking at my brother, then would look away and would repeat this staring cycle. Finally, get off bus and get to apartment. Tell our grandparents about the old lady. My brother soon starts to feel sick to the point where it's hard for him to get out of bed. Call an old neighbor, who's a family friend. Grandma mentions the lady on the bus. Neighbor quickly goes back to her apartment and comes back with a bowl of herbs and other stuff, not sure exactly what. She has my brother breathe it in and sip some of the broth. Within a couple hours, he feels instantly better. Grandma suspects the lady on the bus might have given my brother the evil eye. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen.
Not sure if this counts considering I never met the guy, but be me. 16. Dad wants to spend Christmas with his girlfriend. Get into a big fight over it at a family dinner one night. Uncle offers to let me stay with him over break. Dad agrees. Uncle picks me up the next weekend. Lives in a nice house up in the mountains. Good amount of land, but not nearly as much as his neighbors. But also a 3-hour car ride. Decide to sneak off somewhere to get high. Tell my uncle I want to go for a walk. He tells me it's fine just to make sure to stay on his side of the property line. Apparently his neighbor had shot some hunter chasing a wounded deer onto his property earlier that year. Yeah, whatever. Look around for somewhere not visible from the house. Fucking difficult because the house has huge windows everywhere. Spot an old shed on neighbor's side of the property line. Go check it out. Door has a padlock. Damn. But he left the key in. Sweet. Unlock the shed. Open the door. The smell hits me like a fucking freight train. Smells awful. Like a dead raccoon, but 100 times worse. Fucking dart away from the shed and nearly vomit. What the fuck? PNG. Is this dude a fucking serial killer? Work up the courage to go back over to the shed. Turn on my phone flashlight and shine it inside. Jesus Christ. Decapitated small animal carcasses everywhere. A shitload piled up against a wall. A few rabbits and what I think used to be a coyote nailed to the wall. The walls and the floors are all caked in dried blood. Nope, the fuck out of there. I ended up just walking down the street for 20 minutes to get high behind a 7-Eleven. Went back a couple years later and heard some rumor about the guy shooting himself. Honestly, I'm just glad he didn't catch me snooping around.
One night while taking the 2 a.m. train home from my ex's place, I noticed the guy across the aisle staring at me. It was the train from Atlantic City, and was full of scumbags and casino employees, so I didn't think much of it. Eventually I tried to ease the awkwardness with a nod, but that only made things worse. He scooched to the edge of his seat and smiled, at which point I knew I'd blown it. He was missing all but a few teeth and had styrofoam cups full of who knows what. With about an hour left on the train, he started talking. I had my skateboard with me, which was his conversation starter, and that eventually led to him asking about the people I skate with. When I mentioned the younger kids that hung around the skate park, his eyes lit up. He went on a rant about how he used to help underprivileged children by giving them a place to stay. His story got really uncomfortable when he started fixating on one kid in particular that he'd taken into his home in order to get him off the streets. The cops had apparently raided his place on the word of that one kid.
"We was just wrestling and I may have touched him, but it wasn't my fault."
He told me his life had fallen apart after getting arrested and found guilty of 10 U.S. Code Section 920 Article 120 Subsection B, children in his house. At this point the train was empty besides the two of us, and he offered me whatever was in his cup. I politely declined and made it obvious that I'm done with the conversation. We stop talking until the train stops and I get off without looking at him. As we walk up the stairs alone in the station, I can hear him getting close and he finally asks if he can come home with me. Mind you, I'm a 22-year-old guy at the time. I immediately decline and he continues to ask me until I finally get to the top of the stairs and skate away as fast as possible. Looking back, it's almost funny in a dark humor kinda way. But at the time it was the most uncomfortable situation I'd ever been in. I don't want to imagine what he had in mind for me.
I've met a few creepy people in my time, but this was last night, so it's still pretty fresh. Walking through a sketchy part of my city's downtown area. Place is usually very busy during the day. Lot of shops there. Totally deserted at 5 a.m. Decided to take a shortcut to where I was going. Don't see anyone for around a block. Spot a lady standing under the only working streetlight, standing outside a shop with bars over the windows. Eye contact. She's got crazy eyes. Fuck. Approaches me.
You mind if I use your phone?
Know where this would have gone. Nah. Out of battery. Sorry. Starts crossing the street, moving towards me quickly.
You mind if I use your phone?
It's dead.
I will fucking follow you.
Fantastic. Speed up walking but hear footsteps behind me.
You mind if I use your phone?
Probably followed me for 3 minutes, asking a few more times. Get out of there as fast as I could. Not much of a story, but still pretty creepy in my opinion.
Was working in a hospital for a bit last year, 19th floor. One day I was coming back from getting lunch with a friend working there as well and waiting for the elevator, and saw an older guy standing behind us wearing a dirty shirt, short trousers and flip-flops, in winter, with a cheap plastic bag. Don't think much about it. Lots of weirdos in this part of town. Friend looks absolutely terrified. Elevator comes and we get in. He does so too. 19th floor, we get out. He does so too and stands around the elevators while we go to the doctor's office. As soon as we're inside, my friend tells me how that guy was on his bus that morning and had followed him all the way to the hospital and had apparently been hiding behind a column in the lobby when we went out for lunch. Suddenly someone's knocking on the door. It's a flip-flop man. He says he has a medical emergency, and that he has a mechanical parasite in his ear that we have to cut out right now, all while trying to get inside the office. We were 4 people in there at that time. We told him to go to the ER if he had a problem and escorted him to the elevator going down. Half an hour later I'm walking around the station and there he is again coming out of the elevator. He sees me, makes an exaggerated bow and gets back in the same elevator he came with. We all went home in a group that night, but fortunately that was the last we saw of him. TL.Dr. Schizo on the loose.
Back when I was 16. Walking around small town with pals around 2 a.m. Not really doing anything, just quietly shooting the shit, following the same large circuit. No lights on anywhere, not a soul awake. Noticed the same truck passed us twice within an hour. Set off a red flag, so we doubled back and stood off into a dark parking lot to see if he would pass again. He comes around again very slowly, like he knows we're in the area. Get more sketched out. He stops in the road a few hundred feet away for a minute and speeds away. We nervously laugh it off as a tweaker and decide to do one more lap around town before we split off. Get to the longest, straightest stretch of road and get hit with high beams from half a mile away. We stop walking and wait. Hear a door open and slam, followed by fast footsteps. Can't see shit because headlights. The dude got out of his truck and started sprinting at us without a word. It's just me and one other friend at this point, everyone else had already gone home. He's silently begging me to get out of there. Guy has closed half of the distance and he's breathing heavily. Tell friend to cut down side street and that I'll meet him on the other side. Figure that the dude running at us is most likely tired and that I can easily outrun him after leading him a little ways away. Guy chases me for like 3 minutes without saying a word, but with unbridled rage in his eyes. He eventually eats shit and I zip through the shadows to lose him. Never seen the guy before or since then, nor has anyone else.
When I was 18, after high school final exams, I was selected for some of the preparatory classes to the most difficult selective schools that exist in my country. I didn't want that in the first place, but long story short, my father forced me, so I moved to these classes the next year, in another city. There I was assigned to a paid room with a roommate who is that guy. In that story, at very first glance he appears to be okay. Just a little bit annoying. Like we was playing his music at loud and rapidly became unsettlingly familiar with me as I still barely knew him, like giving nicknames and stuff. To this point, things started to get worse and worse. I was extremely introverted at the time, so I guess I became a perfect prey for him. He would start to try to guess personal information about me, would become intrusive, and use whatever I would naively confess about my personal life ways to demean me, and progressively came to really try to verbally humiliate me. I was very isolated, so I was too responsive to that. It came along with shitty weird stuff, like he would go on my bed as I was lying down reading and make weird comments about a teacher he liked to constantly make fun of, in a sexually ambiguous pose. It came to the point that one day he would block me in the toilets to beat me up on the floor just for fun, I guess. You might think to this point that it was just kind of hardcore bullying, but it was blatant for me that the guy actually simply wanted to gain power on someone that appeared to be weak for no reason, and he could be physically violent at times, even if the biggest part was simply emotional manipulation. For me, he could likely be a narcissistic pervert or something close to that. So I skipped that class after a few months, partly because of him. But after checking his name out a few years later on the internet, I found out the worst part, that he was in the process of becoming a teacher. This guy will have students under his will.
A man stops me walking down busy street in the city.
Can I ask you a question?
Eerily calm and looking right into my eyes. Tall fellow, maybe in his 50s, with dirty beat-up old-timey looking clothes. Can't tell if he's homeless or a hipster. Asks me for an instance in my life when I had a revelation that made me stop believing in something. I had a good answer and he pulled out a small leather notepad and wrote it down. Smiled and nodded as if he knew what I was going to say and just needed me to admit it. Asks me what I'm doing after our meeting. Told him I had plans, I was running late for work at this point. Tells me he's on a journey to visit a cemetery and asked if I would please come with him. Tell him I have work and maybe another time. Tells me which cemetery it is. Cemetery was literally across the street from my house at the time, miles away. Excited and curious of his intentions at this point, I blurt out, I live right there.
But have you seen the way the wind blows on the tops of the trees as the days quietly pass?
I ask him why in the world he's going there and what a coincidence it was. Tells me I really need to come with him to see it. I thought about it, thanked him and turned around and continued walking towards the train. Never saw him again.
B15. Hanging out with my friend in Dublin. I'm from the countryside. We go to hang out with two girls he knows in a park somewhere. Just chilling out beside some trees, nice sunny, dry day. Some 40-something guy, disheveled, fucking fried looking, approaches us. Guy is clearly mentally handicapped, so we're friendly to him, humor him as he asks us who we are. Starts to get sorta aggressive, standing too close, raising his voice irrationally. Not exactly mad, but loud and forceful. We all start to nope.gif in our heads but try to politely come up with an excuse to leave. Crazy man takes a real shine to our friend Grace.
Grace, I will take you, and we get married. Look, I have a car.
He says as he pulls out actual fucking car keys. We're walking away at this point, all har har, see you later, bye now, bye. Fucker starts closing the gap. Starts shouting, in rage. Starts fucking jogging. We break out into a full-on sprint. Not even looking back for a half a minute.
Grace, Grace, I love you.
Turn around to see where he is as we get to the edge of the park. He tripped near the tree, and was just rolling around on the ground kicking up clouds of dust, screaming. Two doctors in coats arrive to catch him as he sparzes out in rage. So, turns out my friends forgot the fucking central mental hospital was right around the corner. Which means the guy was a highly dangerous, forensic patient, and likely killed someone before. Cheers, buddy.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.